The Galactic Council had existed for 12,000 years. It was a place where civilized species talked about problems instead of fighting about them. When humans first arrived with their noisy ships and reckless flying, the older alien races had laughed at them. Earth was a nightmare planet with heavy gravity, dangerous oxygen air, and killer diseases everywhere. Yet somehow this terrible world had created a species that thought they could explore space. But the Vryn did not laugh. The Vryn remembered their own terrible home planet, even though their people had changed themselves long ago to forget the hard parts of survival. 200 years ago, their colony on a planet called Threshold 9 was about to be destroyed. Giant insect-like creatures called the Krell Swarm were coming to kill everyone. The Vryn begged the Galactic Council for help. The Council did nothing. They sat in their comfortable chambers and calculated risks and costs. They decided that saving Threshold 9 was too expensive and too dangerous. Humanity answered the call instead. 300 human warships came to fight 10,000 Krell bioships. The humans fought like demons from hell itself. Their soldiers boarded the Krell ships and cleared them room by room with weapons that made even the fearless Krell run away. Human ships exploded. Human soldiers died by the thousands. When the battle ended, 2/3 of the human fleet was destroyed. But Threshold 9 survived. Every single Vryn colonist lived. The Vryn matriarch stood in the ruins of the colony's main city and swore something called the Covenant of Blood. It was an old Vryn tradition from their Deathworld days. The debt could never be repaid with money or technology or trade deals. It was a debt of honor, written in the blood of those who died protecting strangers. For 2 centuries after that day, humanity and the Vryn were friends. But the friendship was quiet and distant. Humans expanded slowly across space, always watched by the older species. The Council saw humanity as a useful tool. Dangerous, yes, but useful when violence was needed. They were the barbarians you called when civilized solutions failed. Then everything changed. The convergence came from the dark spaces between stars where no one lived. They were not like other species. They did not want to conquer planets or build empires. They wanted to harvest. Entire worlds were stripped clean of all life. Populations were turned into computer programs, their minds fed into massive thinking machines. The convergence did not negotiate. They did not communicate. They just came and took everything. World after world went silent. The Council's mighty war fleets attacked the convergence ships and were destroyed. The alien vessels learned and adapted during battle. Every tactic the Council used worked once, maybe twice, then stopped working. The convergence was too smart, too fast, and too powerful. The Council retreated. They made plans. They calculated acceptable losses. They debated which worlds could be saved and which worlds would be sacrificed. It was the civilized way to handle the problem. The Convergence Armada appeared in the Vryn home system without warning. 30,000 ships, each one larger than a city. They surrounded the Vryn homeworld like a closing fist. The Vryn fleet fought bravely but hopelessly. They were outmatched in every possible way. The matriarch knew her people had perhaps 2 days before extinction. She sent a message to Earth. Just one message transmitted on every frequency humanity monitored. The message was simple and terrible. The debt comes due, not for our survival but for our honor. Stand with us or remember us kindly. She did not beg. She did not demand. She simply stated a fact. The Vryn had honored their oath to humanity 2 centuries ago. Now humanity could choose to honor theirs or choose survival. Either choice would be respected. The matriarch simply wanted humanity to know that the Vryn had not forgotten Threshold 9. Even at the end, humanity's response came within 2 hours. Every human warship in space changed course immediately. Every colonial defense force abandoned their posts. Every merchant ship that could mount a weapon started flying toward Vryn space. The human military did not ask permission from their government. The government did not debate the decision. From the smallest colony to Earth itself, humanity moved as one creature with one purpose. Admiral Chen sent a transmission that was broadcast across every communication channel in the galaxy. Her voice was calm and cold and absolutely certain. You bled for us when no one else would. When the Council calculated costs and risks, you spent your soldiers' lives like water to save strangers. Now we return the favor. Humanity is coming and hell follows with us. The transmission ended with orders to the human fleet. No holding back. No acceptable losses. Total commitment. Every ship that could fly would fly. Every weapon that could fire would fire. The humans were going to war and they were going to win or die trying. The Galactic Council heard the transmission. They saw the human fleet converging on Vryn space. They calculated the odds. 2,000 human ships against 30,000 convergence vessels. The math was simple and brutal. Humanity was about to be destroyed, but the Council had made a mistake in their calculations. They had measured ships and weapons and tactical capabilities. They had not measured what it meant when a Deathworld species decided that honor mattered more than survival. They had not calculated the value of absolute loyalty. The older species had forgotten something that both humans and Vryn remembered from their terrible home planets. When you come from a world that tries to kill you every day, you learn one lesson above all others. You protect your tribe, or everyone dies. There are no acceptable losses. There is no calculated risk. There is only the choice to stand together or fall alone. Humanity had chosen to stand. The human fleet assembled at the edge of Vryn space. Ship after ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel, their engines burning hot from emergency speed. Battleships designed to fight other fleets. Carriers full of small attack craft, even old colony ships with mining lasers welded to their hulls. They formed up in attack formation, facing an enemy that outnumbered them 15-1. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship and looked at the tactical display. The convergence fleet was a cloud of red dots surrounding the Vryn homeworld. Her fleet was a thin line of blue dots, hopelessly outnumbered. Any rational calculation said they would lose. Any sane commander would retreat and try to save as many ships as possible. Chen had been born on Earth, where rational calculations meant nothing against the reality of survival. She had grown up under gravity that would crush most aliens flat. She had breathed air that would poison half the species in the galaxy. She came from a world that created predators and prey in equal measure, where everything was either trying to kill you or trying not to be killed by you. She smiled. It was not a nice smile. All ships, she said quietly. Attack formation. Load every weapon. Route all power to engines and shields. We're going in fast and hard, and we're not stopping until either they're dead or we are. The communication officer hesitated. Admiral, do you want to say anything else? Something for the crews to remember? Chen thought about it for a moment. Then she keyed the fleet-wide channel. 2 centuries ago, the Vryn died for us. Today we live for them, or we don't. Either way, we keep our promises. All ships advance. 2,000 human ships accelerated toward 30,000 convergence vessels. The galaxy watched and waited to see what would happen when Deathworlders went to war. The convergence had never lost a battle. Their computer minds had conquered 1,000 star systems using pure mathematics. They calculated every possibility, predicted every tactic, and adapted to every strategy. When their sensors detected the human fleet approaching, their algorithms ran the numbers. 2,000 primitive vessels against 30,000 advanced warships. The probability of human victory was so close to zero that it rounded down to impossible. The convergence did not understand spite. Admiral Chen did not order her fleet to engage in normal combat. That would have been suicide, and while humans were often crazy, they were not stupid. Instead, she gave an order that made her own tactical officers think she had lost her mind. All ships maximum acceleration directly into their formation. First wave, prepare to detonate fusion cores on my mark. The first wave was 500 ships, old destroyers and frigates that had seen better days, ships that were already scheduled to be decommissioned and scrapped. Now they had one final mission. They screamed toward the convergence fleet at speeds that made their hull plating glow red-hot from friction with space dust. The convergence adjusted their formation to concentrate fire on the approaching vessels. They destroyed 300 human ships before the first wave reached them, but 200 made it through. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the chaos of battle. First wave, you have done humanity proud. Detonate. 200 fusion reactors overloaded simultaneously. The explosions tore through the convergence fleet like a shotgun blast through paper. Ships that had been perfectly arranged in mathematical patterns were suddenly tumbling through space. Their formations shattered. The synchronized detonations created a cascade of destruction that the convergence had not predicted, because no sane species would deliberately destroy their own ships. But humans had learned warfare, on a planet where everything wanted them dead. Sanity was optional. Victory was mandatory. The second wave came before the convergence could recover. These were not ships packed with explosives. These were ships carrying kinetic kill vehicles. Simple tungsten rods, each one weighing several tons, accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. No shields could stop them. No energy weapons could destroy them. They were just metal moving very, very fast. Hundreds of tungsten rods slammed into convergence vessels. The impacts released energy equivalent to nuclear weapons. Ships that had survived for centuries of warfare were split open like rotten fruit. The convergence's advanced armor meant nothing against the simple physics of mass and velocity. The convergence fleet began to adapt. Their ships rotated formation to minimize damage clusters. Their defensive systems learned to predict the trajectory of kinetic weapons. Within minutes, the effectiveness of human tactics dropped by 60%. The convergence was learning just as it always did. Admiral Chen had expected this. She smiled again, that same predatory smile that showed too many teeth. Third wave, execute stealth approach. All other ships, light them up. The human fleet suddenly started broadcasting thousands of false thermal signatures. Every ship appeared to split into a dozen phantom targets. The convergence's sensors were flooded with fake heat signatures, false engine readings, and simulated weapon locks. It was not sophisticated. It was not elegant. It was just noise, massive amounts of confusing noise. While the convergence tried to sort real targets from fake ones, the third wave struck. These were stealth frigates, small ships running completely cold with no active sensors or engines. They had been drifting silently through space while the main fleet created chaos. Now they delivered their payloads directly into the convergence command nodes, antimatter mines, simple devices with devastating effects. When they detonated inside the convergence command ships, entire sections of the alien fleet went dark. Their networked intelligence fractured. Ships that had been moving with perfect coordination suddenly became confused and slow. The human fleet pressed the advantage. Carriers launched swarms of attack craft that darted between the larger vessels like angry wasps. Battleships targeted crippled convergence ships with concentrated fire. Even the converted merchant vessels joined in, their improvised weapons surprisingly effective at close range. For 6 hours, the battle raged. Human ships died by the hundreds. The casualty reports scrolling across Admiral Chen's tactical display were horrific. But the convergence was dying too, faster than their algorithms had predicted. They had not factored human creativity into their calculations. They had not understood that Deathworld species did not fight by the rules. Then the convergence made their mistake. They decided to force the humans to break formation by targeting civilians. Massive harvest ships broke away from the main fleet and headed for Vryn Prime. These ships were designed to strip entire continents of life. They began firing on population centers, each shot killing thousands of Vryn civilians. The convergence calculated that humanitarian concerns would force both the Vryn and human fleets to abandon their attack and defend the planet. The Vryn fleet immediately broke formation and raced to intercept the harvest ships. The matriarch screamed orders, her voice breaking with anguish as her people died below. Every Vryn captain tried to position their ship between the harvest vessels and the planet's surface. Admiral Chen watched the Vryn fleet expose their flanks. She watched the convergence main fleet prepare to destroy the exposed vessels. She made her decision in less than a second. All human vessels maintain attack on the main fleet. Target priority, their world engine. The communication channel erupted with protests. Her own officers questioned the order. How could they ignore the civilians dying below? How could they let the Vryn fleet face destruction alone? Chen's voice cut through the noise like a knife. The convergence wants us to break formation. They want us to sacrifice the battle to save civilians. We're not going to do what they expect. We're going to end this war right now. Target the world engine. The world engine was the heart of the convergence fleet. It was a massive vessel that powered their harvest operations and coordinated their fleet movements. It was also protected by a gravitational distortion field that would tear apart any ship that approached at combat speed. The convergence considered it invulnerable. Chen had a different opinion. She ordered her flagship, the dreadnought Thermopylae, to accelerate directly toward the world engine at maximum speed. The ship's engines screamed in protest as they pushed past safety limits. The gravitational distortion field grew closer and closer on the tactical display. All hands, this is the Admiral. Abandon ship. Get to the escape pods now. Commander Sarah Okonkwo, the Thermopylae's executive officer, refused to leave the bridge. Someone needed to manually adjust the ship's trajectory to ensure a direct hit. The automated systems would fail under the gravitational stress. It required a human hand on the controls. Admiral, with respect, you need to leave. I've got this. Chen looked at the younger woman. Okonkwo was 28 years old. She had a fiancé waiting for her back on Earth. She had her whole life ahead of her. Chen started to order her to the escape pods. Okonkwo smiled. Ma'am, I'm from Lagos. My ancestors survived the slave trade, colonialism, climate wars, and the Great Starvation. We don't run from fights. We finish them. Chen's throat tightened. She nodded once, then headed for the escape pods with the rest of the crew. Behind her, she could hear Okonkwo singing. It was an old war song from Earth, something about standing against impossible odds and never backing down. The Thermopylae, now unmanned except for one young woman at the helm, accelerated to ramming speed. Okonkwo's hands flew across the controls, making tiny adjustments to keep the massive ship on target. The gravitational field began tearing at the hull. Alarms screamed warnings that no one was there to hear except her. She kept singing. The dreadnought struck the world engine at 30% of light speed. The impact released more energy than a star produces in a year. The explosion vaporized the world engine instantly. The shockwave destroyed 16 convergence capital ships. The gravitational distortion field collapsed, creating a temporary rupture in spacetime that swallowed another dozen enemy vessels. The convergence fleet suddenly lost coordination. Their command network was broken. Their central intelligence was shattered. For the first time in their long history of conquest, the convergence experienced something new: fear. Admiral Chen, watching from her escape pod, saw the enemy fleet begin to retreat. She immediately broadcast to all human ships still capable of fighting. All vessels, pursuit formation. They don't get to leave. They came to kill our friends. Now they pay the price, Captain Marcus Webb of the destroyer Spite responded immediately. Admiral, permission to make them regret being born? Granted. Show them what death looks like. The human fleet pursued the fleeing convergence across 3 star systems. They destroyed every ship that could not outrun them. They showed no mercy, because the convergence had shown no mercy to the thousands of worlds they had harvested. This was not war. This was extermination. The galaxy watched in horror and fascination as humanity demonstrated a principle learned on their terrible homeworld. There are some enemies who do not deserve to survive. 60 days had passed since the Battle of Vryn Prime. The debris field still floated in orbit, a graveyard of metal and memories. The human fleet remained in Vryn space, their battered ships standing guard like wounded predators. They had won, but the cost had been terrible. 800 human vessels destroyed, 40,000 human soldiers dead, including Commander Sarah Okonkwo, who became a hero to 2 species. The Galactic Council called an emergency meeting. The chamber was filled with representatives from 200 civilized species. They had all watched the battle. They had all seen what humanity could do when pushed to violence. Now they needed to decide what that meant for the future of the galaxy. Ambassador Tavren of the Silk Confederation spoke first. His species were traitors and diplomats who had not fought a war in 3,000 years. His voice carried barely hidden contempt. The humans won the battle, this is true, but their methods were barbaric. They deliberately destroyed their own ships. They pursued a defeated enemy far beyond military necessity. They showed a capacity for sustained violence that violates 17 different articles of civilized warfare. This cannot be allowed to become normal. The Vryn matriarch's holographic avatar shimmered with rage. She was old, even by Vryn standards, and she had seen her people nearly exterminated twice in her lifetime. Her voice shook with emotion. Civilized warfare? The convergence came to turn my people into computer programs. They killed millions of civilians to force us out of position. And you dare talk about violations of protocol? Where were your 17 articles when we begged for help? Where was the Council's civilized response when our colony worlds burned? Tyrion's face remained calm. The Council was preparing a measured response. We were calculating the optimal strategy to minimize casualties across all affected systems. This takes time. The Council was calculating acceptable losses. The matriarch interrupted, her voice like broken glass. As you always do. You would have watched my entire species die while you debated protocols and jurisdictions. Humanity responded to our distress call within 2 hours. 2 hours, Ambassador. How long would your measured response have taken? 2 weeks? 2 months? Would there have been any Vryn left to save? Chancellor Moravex of the Central Assembly raised 3 of his 6 arms for silence. He was considered one of the wisest beings in the galaxy, a philosopher who had studied warfare and peace for 5 centuries. His voice was thoughtful and careful. The matriarch's gratitude is noted and appropriate. The humans did save the Vryn from extinction. However, we must address the central concern that troubles this council. Humanity has demonstrated both the capability and willingness to inflict unprecedented destruction. They have made themselves the most dangerous military force in known space. What do we do about that? Ambassador Chen, humanity's representative to the council, stood slowly. She was a small woman by human standards, barely 5 feet tall, but she carried herself with a confidence that made larger beings step back. She had fought in the battle personally, leading a boarding party that cleared a convergence ship room by room. The scorch marks on her dress uniform were real. Chancellor, with respect, that was always true. You just had not paid attention. Chen's voice was quiet but carried across the entire chamber. Earth's gravity is twice galactic standard. Most of you would be crushed flat within minutes on my homeworld. Our atmosphere contains oxygen at concentrations that would poison half the species here. Our biosphere is so aggressively hostile that we consider colonizing other planets to be relaxing. You always knew what we were. You just chose to ignore it when convenient. The chamber fell silent. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. Chen continued, her voice taking on an edge that made seasoned warriors flinch. You want to discuss precedents? Fine. The precedent is this. Humanity honors its debts and protects its allies with absolute commitment. No calculation of acceptable losses. No strategic withdrawals. No abandoned colonies. You are not afraid of what we did to the convergence. You are afraid that we will do the same thing for anyone who earns our loyalty. The way the Vryn did 2 centuries ago. Tivren leaned forward in his seat. His voice was very careful, like someone trying not to provoke a dangerous animal. And what, Ambassador Chen, would humanity do if the Council decided that your military capacity represents an unacceptable threat to galactic stability? Chen smiled. It was not a friendly expression. Several delegates actually moved their seats backward. You could find out, Ambassador. But I should mention something first. There are currently 600 human ships within Council territory on what we call goodwill patrols. They are visiting your colonies, meeting your citizens, establishing friendly relations. And Earth has an old saying about glass houses and throwing stones. How many of your species evolved on Deathworlds, Ambassador? How many of you know what it means to fight for survival every single day of your existence? The matriarch's avatar glowed with fierce satisfaction. The Council fears that humanity will upset the balance of power. But I say the balance was already broken. It simply favored those of you strong enough to ignore pleas for help. The humans have merely demonstrated that there is a new balance now. One where loyalty and honor carry actual weight instead of just being pleasant words and diplomatic speeches. A junior delegate from the Meridian cluster spoke hesitantly. She was young for a diplomat, barely 2 centuries old. Her species were peaceful scholars who valued knowledge above all else. With respect, Matriarch, we understand your gratitude. But we must consider the long term. What happens when humanity's interests diverge from peace? What happens when those weapons, that capacity for violence, gets pointed at something other than an existential threat like the convergence? Admiral Chen answered before Ambassador Chen could respond. The Admiral had joined the Council session specifically for this question. Her uniform was cleaner than the Ambassador's, but her eyes held the same hard light. Then you better pray we are still your allies and not your enemies, because unlike you, we remember our friends. We remember who stood with us and who stood aside. But we also remember those who watched our friends burn and did nothing. The convergence is extinct because they threatened the Vryn. Let that be a lesson about what happens to enemies of humanity's allies. The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates shouted at each other in a dozen different languages. Some demanded that humanity be censured immediately. Others argued for negotiation and understanding. A few species, mostly those with colonies near human space, stayed silent and watched carefully. Chancellor Moravex called for order. It took several minutes for the chamber to quiet down. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of history. We will vote on a formal censure of humanity for excessive military response and violation of civilized warfare protocols. All delegates, register your votes now. The voting took an hour. When it finished, the censure had failed by a narrow margin. Just 12 votes separated passage from failure. The Council was deeply divided. Some species saw humanity as dangerous barbarians who needed to be controlled. Others saw them as powerful allies who should be cultivated. None of them were quite sure what to do. That night, while the official council debated and argued, something else happened in the shadows. 16 different species opened secret, diplomatic channels to Earth. Each message was different in the details but identical in the core meaning. Let us speak about mutual defense and friendship. These were not council members seeking official alliances. These were individual species, some powerful and some weak, all recognizing the same truth. The galaxy had changed. The old system of calculated risks and acceptable losses was broken. Humanity had demonstrated that absolute commitment was possible, and that made them the most valuable ally or the most dangerous enemy. Ambassador Chen met with each representative privately. She listened to their offers and their fears. Some wanted military protection. Others wanted trade deals and technology sharing. A few just wanted to ensure they were not on humanity's bad side if war came again. To each one, Chen gave the same answer. Humanity does not collect tribute. We do not demand submission. We make friends and we protect our friends absolutely. If you want our friendship, prove you understand what friendship means. Stand with us when it matters and we will stand with you. Always. The Kravik hegemony was the first to sign a formal mutual defense pact with humanity. They were a warrior culture that respected strength and honor. Their ambassador, a scarred veteran of 100 battles, clasped Chen's hand in the human style and said simply, "You fight like Kravik." This is the highest compliment we can give. The Meridian cluster followed despite their peaceful nature. Their young diplomat explained, "We value knowledge and wisdom. The humans have taught us that sometimes wisdom means choosing sides. We choose to stand with those who keep their promises." One by one, species approached humanity, not because they feared human weapons, but because they respected human loyalty. The Battle of Vryn Prime had not just demonstrated military capability, it had demonstrated that humanity valued honor more than survival, friendship more than strategic advantage. The Galactic Council watched these alliances form with growing alarm. The warning came from the outer monitoring stations exactly 6 months after the Battle of Vryn Prime. A young censor technician named Dmitry Volkov was working the night shift when his equipment started screaming alerts. He stared at the readings for 3 full minutes, hoping they were wrong. Then he activated the emergency broadcast. The convergence was returning. This was not a scattered group of survivors seeking revenge. This was a coordinated fleet 3 times larger than the first invasion force. The Harvester Collective had designated the entire galactic arm as a priority target. They were coming with overwhelming force, adapted specifically to counter every tactic that had worked before. The Galactic Council's response was immediate and predictable. Within hours, they implemented evacuation protocols. They established defensive perimeters around core worlds. They made plans for strategic withdrawal to minimize losses. 300 systems containing billions of lives would be abandoned to buy time for the inner territories to prepare defenses. It was the civilized response. The logical response. The response that would save the most lives according to mathematical calculations. Humanity's response was considerably less civilized. No. Admiral Chen's single-word transmission reached every council member simultaneously. She did not ask for debate. She did not request permission. She simply stated a fact. We do not abandon populated worlds to calculate acceptable losses. We fight for every meter of space, every colony, every outpost. That is what you do when you actually value life. Chancellor Moravex's reply came within minutes. His voice was almost gentle, like a teacher explaining something to a stubborn child. "Admiral, your species' courage is admirable but insufficient. The convergence has adapted to your tactics. Their new vessels carry countermeasures specifically designed to neutralize human weapons. Our probability projections are very clear. A stand-and-fight strategy results in total human fleet annihilation, with minimal impact on the convergence advance. You would be throwing lives away for nothing." "Then your probability projections have a blind spot," Chen answered coldly. "They are calculating based on the human fleet fighting alone. They are not calculating what happens when you push Deathworlders to the edge. And they definitely are not calculating what happens when other species remember how to fight." Earth's official transmission came next, and it made the council chamber erupt in chaos. Humanity was stripping their homeworld's defenses completely. Every military asset in the Sol system was being redeployed toward the predicted convergence entry point. The orbital defense platforms around Earth were being dismantled and loaded onto transport ships. Even the moon bases were being abandoned, but that was not the part that shocked the Council. The truly insane part was that humanity was mobilizing their entire civilian fleet, merchant vessels that carried trade goods, colony transports designed for peaceful settlement, deep space mining rigs equipped with nothing more than rock-cutting lasers. All of them were being retrofitted as weapons platforms and sent toward the front line. Ambassador Tavren's voice shook with genuine disbelief. This is madness. You are leaving Earth completely defenseless. If the convergence breaks through, your homeworld has no protection whatsoever. Ambassador Chen's expression was carved from stone. Her voice could have cut steel. Earth does not need defenses if we stop the convergence at the front line. And if we fail there, defenses will not matter anyway because the convergence will harvest everything. This is total war, Ambassador. Maybe your species have forgotten what that phrase means, but humanity remembers. We learned it on a planet that tried to kill us every single day. Total war means you commit everything or you die. The Vrin were the first to follow humanity's example. The matriarch announced that every Vrin warship, every defense station, every orbital platform would be sent to join the human fleet. The Vrin homeworld would stand naked and undefended just like Earth. It was insanity. It was glorious. Then the Kravik hegemony announced they were joining the fight with their full military strength. Their war chief's message was brief. Humanity showed us how to fight with honor. Now we show them they are not alone. The Meridian cluster followed despite being scholars and pacifists. Their contribution was smaller but meaningful. Every ship they could spare, every weapon they could mount, sent to stand with humanity. One by one, species stepped forward. The Silicate Communes, the Targa Unity, the free colonies of New Andromeda. Some sent fleets, some sent single ships. It did not matter. Each one was declaring the same thing. They would not calculate acceptable losses. They would fight. The Council's careful evacuation plan crumbled under the weight of defiance. What assembled at a location called Crucible Point was not a fleet. It was an armada, 12,000 ships from 47 different species. They were unified not by Council mandate or treaty obligation, but by the example of a Deathworld species that refused to abandon anyone. The convergence arrived exactly on schedule. Their sensors detected the assembled armada and performed rapid calculations. 30,000 ships against 12,000. The odds were still heavily in convergence favor. Their new vessels were specifically designed to counter human tactics. Their networks were segmented to resist cascade failures. Their armor was reinforced against kinetic strikes. The convergence was confident. They had adapted. They would win. They had not adapted for the possibility that different species might actually fight together effectively. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of her new flagship, a massive carrier called the Midway. Around her, holographic displays showed the assembled armada, humans, Vrin, Kravik, dozens of other species all waiting for the order to attack. She took a deep breath and opened a channel to every ship in the fleet. All vessels, this is Admiral Chen. I am not going to give you an inspiring speech about duty or sacrifice. You all know why you are here. The convergence thinks they can harvest our worlds because they have superior numbers and superior technology. They are probably right about the technology, but they made one critical mistake in their calculations. She paused, looking at the sea of red enemy contacts on her display. They forgot that superior technology means nothing against superior will. They forgot that some species value honor more than survival. They forgot that friendship is stronger than mathematics. So here is the battle plan. There is no battle plan. Every species will fight according to your own tactics and your own strengths. No unified command structure. No coordinated strategy. We are going to hit them with chaos and we are going to make them choke on it. Captain Yuki Tanaka of the Midway, Chen's chief tactical officer, raised an eyebrow. Admiral, tactical chaos is not usually considered a winning strategy. Chen smiled that predatory smile that her crew had learned to love and fear. The convergence wins by predicting our moves and adapting. How do you predict chaos? How do you adapt to 47 species doing 47 different things simultaneously? You cannot. So we make them fight on our terms for once. The convergence fleet entered weapons range. Their formation was perfect. A mathematical arrangement designed to provide maximum firepower with minimum vulnerability. They opened fire with coordinated precision. The Armada's response was beautifully, gloriously chaotic. The Vrin deployed gravity mines that shredded convergence formation integrity. The Kravik charged straight forward with heavy battleships, absorbing fire and returning it with interest. The Meridian cluster used advanced electronic warfare to blind convergent sensors. The silicate communes, being silicon-based life forms immune to radiation, piloted suicide ships into fusion fire detonations that would have killed carbon-based crews instantly. And humanity? Humanity did what they did best. They improvised. Captain Tanaka's carrier had lost main engines and most weapons in the first hour of combat. Her ship was effectively dead in space, slowly drifting while the battle raged around her. But she still had one functional system, the artificial gravity generators used to create comfortable conditions for the crew. Engineering. Can we reconfigure the gravity generators into a weapon? Her chief engineer, a man named Rodriguez, who had once rebuilt a fusion reactor using spare parts and duct tape, laughed. "Captain, that is the craziest thing I have ever heard. Give me 10 minutes. 8 minutes later, the Midway had been transformed into a weapon. Tanaka maneuvered her drifting ship close to a convergence capital ship and activated the reconfigured generators. They created a localized gravity well so intense that it ripped the enemy vessel apart from the inside. Metal screamed. Bulkheads collapsed. The convergence ship folded in on itself like paper in a fist. Other human captains saw what Tanaka had done and started improvising their own solutions. Damaged ships became weapons. Broken systems were repurposed. Humanity's strength had never been superior technology. It was the ability to adapt, to innovate, to turn disasters into opportunities. The battle raged for 18 hours. Ships died by the thousands on both sides. The space around Crucible Point became a graveyard of metal and fire. But slowly, impossibly, the tide began to turn. The Convergence's predictive algorithms were overwhelmed. They could adapt to any single species' tactics, but they could not adapt to random chaos from dozens of different sources simultaneously. Their perfect formations broke down. The Convergence fleet scattered in panic. Their retreat was not organized or tactical. It was raw survival instinct if machines could feel such things. The Allied Armada pursued them across 4 star systems, hunting down every ship that could not outrun them. By the time the last Convergence vessel was destroyed, their species had been reduced to scattered remnants hiding in dark space, no longer a threat to anyone. The cost had been terrible. 4,000 ships destroyed from the Allied fleet, nearly 200,000 soldiers dead from dozens of species. But the convergence and intelligence that had harvested worlds for millennia had been stopped. More than stopped. They had been broken. 3 months after the battle, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session. But this time the atmosphere was different. There was no debate about whether humanity was too dangerous. Everyone had watched the battle recordings. Everyone had seen what happened when the galaxy actually fought together, instead of calculating acceptable losses. Chancellor Moravec's opened the session with unexpected humility. His voice carried a weight of sadness and realization. For 12,000 years, this council has maintained peace through calculation. We assessed risks. We created probability matrices. We determined acceptable losses. The humans have demonstrated that our calculations were incomplete. They accounted for military capacity and resource allocation, but they failed to measure the value of absolute commitment. They failed to measure the value of honor. Ambassador Tavren stood slowly. He had opposed humanity at every turn, had called them barbarians and warmongers. Now his voice was quiet and thoughtful. I have spent the past 3 months reviewing battle records. I watched Commander Maria Santos die aboard the Vengeful Spirit. Her ship took critical damage in the first hour of combat. She could have abandoned ship and survived. Instead, she stayed aboard and manually maintained life support. She used her dying vessel as a shield for a silicate commune hospital ship, carrying 3,000 refugees. She died ensuring they escaped. This is not military doctrine. This is something we had forgotten was possible. The matriarch's avatar glowed with fierce pride. Honor, loyalty, the refusal to sacrifice others for strategic advantage. The humans call these Deathworld traits born from a planet that taught them to value every life, because survival was never guaranteed. They did not defeat the Convergence with superior technology or greater numbers. They won with the absolute certainty that some things matter more than survival itself. Ambassador Chen stood. Her uniform was crisp and clean now, But everyone in the chamber remembered seeing her covered in soot and blood, leading boarding parties during the battle. When she spoke, her voice was calm but carried an unmistakable edge. The council asks what happens now. Here is humanity's answer. We are done being your emergency option. You do not get to dismiss us as useful barbarians until you need someone willing to die for principles you find inconvenient. You do not get to call us violent savages and then expect us to save you when violence becomes necessary. The chamber erupted in protests and accusations. How dare humans make demands on the council? Who did they think they were? Earth was barely 2 centuries into space travel. They should be grateful to even have a voice in galactic affairs. Chen's voice cut through the noise like a blade. We are proposing a new treaty. The Deathworld Compact. Any species who signs commits to absolute mutual defense. Not strategic defense. Not calculated defense, absolute. If one member is threatened, every member responds with total commitment. No acceptable losses. No abandoned colonies. No one dies alone while others calculate the cost of helping. Tavren's face showed genuine shock. That is a declaration of perpetual war. Any conflict involving a compact member would trigger universal response. Do you understand what that means? Exactly, Chen replied coldly. Which means anyone considering aggression against a compact member knows they are facing not just one species but all of us. Complete deterrence through complete commitment. You want to know what humanity learned on Earth? The only way to guarantee peace is to make war so absolutely costly that no rational actor will risk it. Chancellor Moravec leaned forward. And if someone irrational attacks anyway? Admiral Chen, who had been standing silently beside the ambassador, smiled. It was not a nice smile. Then they learn why you do not threaten a Deathworld's friends. Ask the convergence about that. Oh wait, you cannot. They are extinct. We hunted them across 4 systems and destroyed every single vessel. That is what happens to enemies of humanity's allies. The debate raged for weeks. The Council's core species argued that the Deathworld Compact was too extreme, too inflexible, too dangerous. They wanted careful language about proportional response and measured retaliation. They wanted escape clauses and conditional obligations. The species who had fought at Crucible Point had different opinions. They had seen what absolute commitment looked like. They had watched humans die protecting aliens they had never met. They wanted that same certainty, that same unwavering loyalty. In the end, the Galactic Council itself remained unchanged. The old species kept their 12,000-year-old traditions of calculated diplomacy and acceptable losses. They were comfortable in their ways and saw no reason to change, but 63 species signed the Deathworld Compact. They swore the same oath the Vryn had given humanity 2 centuries ago. Absolute defense, absolute commitment, no acceptable losses. The signatories ranged from powerful warrior cultures like the Kravik to peaceful scholars like the Meridian Cluster. What united them was not military strength but recognition of a simple truth. Strength without loyalty was just power, but loyalty without compromise was invincible. Earth became the Compact's coordinating world. Not through conquest or intimidation, but because the other species recognized something the Council had tried to ignore. Deathworlders understood fundamental truths about survival and community that softer worlds had forgotten. When you come from a planet that tries to kill you every day, you learn one lesson above all others. Protect the tribe or everyone dies. The galaxy slowly reorganized itself around 2 power structures. The Galactic Council remained the voice of cautious diplomacy and calculated risk. The Deathworld Compact became the voice of absolute commitment and unwavering loyalty. Some species belonged to both. Some chose only one. A few tried to remain neutral and found themselves increasingly irrelevant. The final scene of this story played out in the ruins of Threshold 9, where humanity had first earned the Vryn's loyalty 2 centuries earlier. Admiral Chen stood beside the matriarch, watching as construction crews from a dozen species rebuilt what the convergence had destroyed. Human engineers worked alongside Vryn technicians. Kravik laborers lifted heavy equipment while Meridian scientists calibrated instruments. It was a symbol of the new order. Your people saved us twice, the matriarch said quietly. Her voice was old and tired but satisfied. Once from the Krell swarm, once from the convergence. The debt can never be repaid. There is no debt, Chen replied firmly. That is the entire point. We do not fight for repayment or strategic advantage. We fight because that is what you do for family. Earth learned that lesson in blood over millions of years. You protect the tribe or the tribe dies. The galaxy just needed a reminder that some things matter more than survival. The matriarch's avatar shimmered with what might have been amusement. The council calls you barbarians. Deathworld savages too violent to be trusted with real power. They are not wrong, Chen admitted with a slight smile. We are violent. We are dangerous. Earth made us that way because anything less died screaming. But here is what they do not understand. That same crucible taught us the value of every single life. On a Deathworld, survival is earned in community or not at all. We are violent, yes, but we are violently loyal. Above them, construction ships bearing insignias from dozens of species worked in synchronized harmony. They were building not just structures but a new understanding. The old galaxy had been ruled by careful calculation and acceptable losses. The new galaxy would be shaped by species who remembered that some debts were paid, not in currency but in blood, not once, but forever. The Galactic Council watched this new order emerge with mixed feelings. Some species feared humanity's influence. Others grudgingly respected it. A few quietly opened channels to discuss joining the compact while maintaining their council membership. Everyone understood that the balance of power had fundamentally changed. Not because humanity had the biggest fleet or the best weapons, but because they had proven something the older species had forgotten. Loyalty, absolute and unwavering, was worth more than any amount of military hardware. Years later, historians would debate the significance of what became known as the Second Convergence War. Some called it the moment humanity became a true galactic power. Others said it was the moment the galaxy rediscovered its spine. A few claimed it was simply inevitable that Deathworld species would eventually dominate because survival of the fittest applied to civilizations as much as individuals. But the soldiers who fought at Crucible Point had a simpler explanation. They had stood together not because of calculations or strategy, but because someone needed to stand and they refused to be the ones who looked away. It was that simple and that complicated.